When I posted the Amazing Digital Circus analysis and rewrite, I was not expecting anywhere near this level of response. Holy cow, this was the coolest thing. Thank you to everyone who watched that video. I'm really speechless. This was awesome. And thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts about the video and the Amazing Digital Circus in the comments. It's actually from you guys that we get the topic of this video. So thanks again for inspiring me to really dive into our topic for today. And thank you so much for giving my video the chance. There were a lot of thoughts shared about Jax as a character, some positive, some negative, and some in between. From the people who really did not like Jax, I noticed an interesting pattern in their criticism of how he was written. Most of those critiques and opinions centered on the idea that Jax was written as a self-insert for Gooseworks, using him to explore her own struggles with her gender. Anytime the self-insert idea was brought up, it was very clear that most people did not like it. There was simply something about the idea of the artist and writer inserting herself into the story that simply did not connect with people. Today, I would like to understand where this comes from and if we, as writers, should be more conscientious of putting too much of ourselves into our stories. What is the deal with self-inserts, and do they weaken the stories being told? To start, what is the official definition of a self-insert? Well, self-insert is actually a relatively recent term. In literature, writers and literary analysts would use the term author surrogates to describe what is essentially the same thing. An author surrogate is explained as an intentional writing technique that transforms a character into the author themselves, allowing the author to share their own personal perspectives and philosophies within the story itself. One great example is the main character from Jurassic Park, where Michael Crichton used Ian Malcolm to explore his own philosophies and fears with genetic sciences. Another example would be the donkey Benjamin from George Orwell's Animal Farm, who is against a lot of what happens at the farm, including the death of Boxer the horse. All in all, self-insertion is not new. Authors and artists have been inserting themselves into their own work for a very long time, and with a varying level of response from the general public. So why would these legendary writers and storytellers put themselves into their own stories? Well, it all stemmed from the nature of the stories that they were telling. Jurassic Park has a very, very clear theme and message. The thematic question of the story is, can and will genetic science go too far? Michael Crichton believed that yes, genetic study can and probably will overstep its scientific and humane boundaries, and he wanted to illustrate that through his narrative. Thus, it makes perfect sense why he would put himself into the story. This is a message that he believes very strongly, and the only way that he could express that is through a character that is a surrogate of himself. The same goes for George Orwell's Animal Farm. George Orwell has a very clear message for the readers. Communism will always be corrupted by the greedy. George Orwell believes this so strongly that it makes perfect sense to include a character that represents George Orwell's own worldview on the matter. All in all, these writers and storytellers are using author surrogates to enhance a very personal message and fear that they want to express to their audience. The use of a self-insert is very intentional for these stories to work as well as they do. So what happens when an author includes a self-insert into their story that doesn't adhere to those established technical guidelines? Well, we get Dante's Inferno. In this work, Dante Alighieri explores his own philosophy and idea of what purgatory and hell is like. He journeys through the 9 levels of hell, with punishments getting worse and worse as he descends closer and closer to the center of the earth. What makes Dante's Inferno a really interesting example of an author surrogate is that most of Dante's personal biases, either in favor of or against the people around him, is almost comically obvious in the way Dante writes. When Dante descends into Limbo, a place for good people who are not baptized into Christianity, he is greeted by Homer, Horace, Ovid, and Lucan. These are all real poets and writers who Dante clearly really liked, because when they show up, this happens. When they together had discoursed somewhat, they turned to me with signs of salutation, and on beholding this, my master smiled. And more of honor still, much more they did me, in that they made me one of their own band, so that the 6th was I, mid so much wit. Dante literally wrote himself into a situation where he got to hang out with his favorite writers and poets. This is the most self-insert story I have ever seen, and it keeps going. There are other sections of Dante's Inferno where Dante sees people he doesn't like suffering in really deep levels of hell, and Dante is like, well, They deserve that, I guess. It's honestly really funny, but holy cow, Dante's Inferno is so long. And Dante's Inferno actually leads us to our next chapter of this self-insert journey, because Dante has introduced us to a whole new breed of author surrogates known as the ideal author surrogate. An ideal author surrogate is still the author inserting themselves into their own story, but now that self-insert transforms the story into more wish fulfillment than thematic exploration. Instead of using an author surrogate as a way to express deep and personal beliefs and worldviews, an ideal author surrogate allows the author to go on their dream adventure with their favorite heroes. You can really see this in Dante's Inferno as he joins himself with his favorite writers and poets and has them call him one of their own band. In doing research for this episode, one of the most commonly cited places for these ideal author surrogates is in fanfiction, which is unbelievably fitting as Dante's Inferno is by definition Bible fanfiction. It's actually within fanfiction that we see the next evolution of this ideal author surrogate. In 1973, Paula Smith published a short story called A Trekkie's Tale, a story about a young lieutenant who works on the Starship Enterprise, interacting and leading all of the classic Star Trek characters. This young lieutenant that Paula Smith wrote was named Mary Sue, and unbeknownst to Paula, she coined one of the most cited character archetypes that would live on for the next 50 years, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. While a Mary Sue character is not strictly the same as an ideal author surrogate, it does provide a natural progression of its previous form. A Mary Sue character is not just wish fulfillment for the author, but additionally has basically no personal flaws and weaknesses. In other words, the Mary Sue character stands in a league all unto itself. Now that this specific type of ideal author surrogate has a name, we suddenly start seeing more and more examples of the Mary Sue self-insert. While this did mostly stay in the fanfiction world, there are a couple of instances where the Mary Sue self-insert bled into the wider world of storytelling, with the most popular example being Stephenie Meyer's Twilight. While some of you may not believe me, when broken down, Twilight is structured the exact same as the Mary Sue self-inserts we see in fanfiction. Bella Swan quickly becomes the center of attention both at her high school and in the vampire and werewolf worlds, despite having zero character traits and strengths other than the fact that she loves Edward and wants to be a sparkly vampire. Twilight is actually the window to a larger discussion about the deterioration of teen girl romance that we'll have to save for another time, but it's on my list, don't you worry. And all of that leads us to today, where we see an interesting blend of classic literary author surrogates and modern Mary Sue self-inserts. In 2023, Velma was released as a clear self-insert to express the creator's political worldview, and that did not go well. The creator of Velma understood the bones of why writers and authors would put themselves into a story, but also pulled on the fanfiction element with this alternate dimension version of Scooby-Doo. What resulted was a story that was universally hated because the intense political drive of the creator clashed with the structure and world of the story. It was around this time that we saw more and more of these stories pop up in the general storytelling space that fit this description. An author surrogate blended with elements of fanfiction, making for a story that inherently clashes with its own identity. These stories are trying to have the messaging power of George Orwell's Animal Farm while still holding on to the wish fulfillment writing of Paula Smith's A Trekkie's Tale. So what do we as writers do with all of this history of the author surrogate? Well, I think it proves that storytelling is a craft that requires a great deal of study and practice. So many of these stories that I mentioned had something they desperately wanted to say but lacked the technical skill to pull them off. They fell victim to the patterns and habits of those who only write for their own enjoyment and not for the world to witness and scrutinize. Quick aside here, if you want to write a wish fulfillment fan fiction of you hanging out with your favorite character because that's how you like to spend a Saturday night, break every single rule. Do whatever you want with that and don't let some random guy on the internet tell you how to tell your fun stories. However, if you want to tell stories that change people, if you want to tell stories that will mean something to someone and will allow them to look into your heart, mind, and soul as a storyteller, take the time to learn the techniques and to practice the craft. Storytelling is very artistic, yes, but it is also very methodical and mechanical in nature. If you learn the scientific side of storytelling, you will get so much better at using the tools you have to express and share the ideas in your soul. A great tool to use in your writing is an author surrogate, and a good storyteller will understand when and how to pull this tool out in such a way that it enhances and elevates their story. Author surrogates are not meant to provide justification or closure for the author, nor are they built to support the storyteller in their own biases, frustrations, and opinions. An author surrogate is a tool the storyteller can use to express explore their own experiment or to tell their own story. In the credits of Jon Favreau's Chef, which was written to have the main character be a very obvious author surrogate for Jon Favreau himself, we read this line. While this picture is suggested by actual events, this motion picture is in its entirety a work of fiction. All character names have been invented, all characters have been composited or invented, and incidents have all been fictionalized. Storytelling is still storytelling, but an author surrogate can be used to enhance the story being told. Us as writers and storytellers just need the practice and mastery over the craft to know when the story itself will benefit from our very present. Thank you guys so much for watching that video. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed, because there's so much more coming down your way. And if you want to discover the story that I am working on currently and trying to get off the ground, check out my second channel, Chapter 1 Games, to learn more about the Night of Horrors, Darkness Rising.